Religion has many victims, and these are the stories of how they survived. Welcome back to The Awakening. I'm your host, Heather.
And I'm your co host, Tamara.
We are so excited to have you with us today. Today's conversation is an important one, and we want to invite you to listen with gentleness toward yourself.
And in this episode, we're joined by Jeff, a trauma therapist, who's going to walk us through what trauma really is beyond the buzzwords.
We'll explore how trauma shows up in our bodies, how it impacts our nervous system and daily lives, and why healing isn't about getting over it, but learning how to feel safe again.
And whether you're beginning your healing journey or have been doing this work for a long time, we hope this conversation offers understanding, compassion, and practical insight. Let's get started. Jeff,
Yes.
to the one who taught me to be curious. You did not hand me answers. You opened the door and said, "What do you notice?" like no one before. This is new. No fixing, no pointing out what is wrong, no cutting away parts of me in order to belong. Just curiosity, open and vast, wide enough for my nervous system to finally relax. I was taught that surviving was something to hide, a weakness, a stain, a dangerous tide. Where I am afraid to look, I'm afraid to be seen, afraid curiosity will tear at the seams. You stayed right there, not ahead nor behind, just steady and present, a meeting of minds. I bring you my dreams, still warm in my hands, not knowing their language or where they will land. I trust you with images, fragile and true, and you hold them like letters my surviving self writes to you. You do not box me in, you do not explain. You sit with me and you honored my pain. You asked, "What is this trying to protect?" No one has ever shown me this kind of respect. You looked at my scars and you called them art. And you said, "Of course you adapt. You do what you know from the start. Your body is speaking before you have words. It is keeping you here when everything blurs. Something inside me finally knows I did not have to keep flinching just to get through. We are harmed in relationships and wounded by fear, but healed in the presence that says, I am here. Now, when old fears come flooding my way, telling me questions will lead me astray, I hear your voice, gentle, still, steady, and kind. What do you notice? You whisper in my mind. I breathe, I look, I finally dare to stay with the truth instead of the scare. I am no longer walking this road in the dark, just tracing the questions you helped me to start. Because of this, when old fears appear, I do not vanish or fold or dissolve into tears. I pause with the ache, the doubt, with the stir, with a part of me still learning how to be her. Not because you tell me what I have to become, but you stayed while I listened to where I was from. You hold the white space where my curiosity grows, where my questions are safe and my story is true. Now, when I'm lonely or shaky or small, the old voice of shame begins to beckon its call. I remember the way you stay right with me, how you do not rush me, how you let things be. I find myself standing, still here, still aware, still choosing to stay with the questions I fear. Thank you so much for showing me how to be curious when I did not know yet how to stay with myself. Your presence changes how I listen to my own inner world. I love you.
Hmm.
Oh, that's so
That
sweet.
could not have been said better. That is my philosophy, what she just described there. Thank you, Tamara. That was very kind.
It's so beautiful.
I was hoping that it did justice to you, Jeff. I was hoping I could read it without crying. So now I'm going to like zip out of the thing. wipe my tears. Okay, now I can come back. Just so you know, if it wasn't for him, um, helping me with that very first dream that had been haunting me for over and over and over again, and just telling me to be curious about the world around me, because up until then I was afraid. I was too afraid to even look outside my own little box I had closed in for myself, because that was the safest place for me to
Yeah,
be. And him encouraging me to be curious um, really set me on the journey of really healing. So I want
that's
you to
so
know that, Jeff.
beautiful.
Yes.
Mhm.
Well, just to kind of amplify that point is the reason why I keep using the word curious, which you heard throughout that poem, is because our default is judgment, and judgment is what keeps us in the box, or it's what keeps us small.
Ooh,
And the idea of curiosity, to her point, as she read, is how does this behavior protect me? And that is not a question people typically ask. They just say it's wrong. Whatever it is that you're doing, it's bad, it doesn't fit the societal standards, whatever it is, it's wrong. And what we have to understand is the human psyche is an incredibly complex organism in order to be able to keep us safe. And so when I say about that belonging trumps authenticity, judgment is a tool that belonging uses in order to negate our authenticity. And that's why we have to move to curiosity. And to the other point that Tamara was making is that our body is going to go into hyper alert. As soon as we start to get curious, it says danger, danger, danger. That is not okay to
yep,
do because it puts belonging at risk. And so we need to have the tools to be able to quiet our nervous system down that allows us the opportunity to be curious. And it is a messy journey because we'll go back and forth between curiosity and judgment. And when we go back into judgment, it's really messy. And then we kind of lean back into, and we have some grace for ourselves, and we go back into, okay, so how is this helpful to me? And when we understand some of those core principles, safety first, and belonging is a form of safety, then I'm going to do almost anything I need to do in order to be safe.
yeah,
And that to me becomes the grace that we need to give ourselves and hopefully regulates our nervous system enough to be present with other people and ultimately to find our new tribe, which is what I talk all the
yes,
time about the LGBT communities, because you won't find your tribe here.
yeah,
And there is a tribe out there. But we have to feel one worthy that we deserve to have that tribe and that we're okay. Who we are is okay.
yeah.
And Jeff, you know, my word this year is reclamation, right? So I was talking, I've been in trauma therapy now since February of last year, like intensely. And there was a couple things I didn't realize that I would never be healed from trauma. For some reason, I thought there would be an end date and I would be better. So it definitely put it in perspective, knowing that I'm going to have to use those tools, not just think that those tools are going to heal me in those situations. But on one Friday, when you joined the live with me and the women joined the live, it was so important to me because it reclaimed three things that I didn't have language for. And the first one is because I always avoid and I never speak and I never stand up for myself. Um, and I always just take it. The second was it was the first time I had ever asked my community, men and women, to come and support me and just stay with me. Don't say anything, just be present with me. And they showed up. And the third was womanhood, because that's not something that was allowed in my Christian upbringing. The women were the police. The women were the ones who went to the pastor. The women were the ones who tattled on you and did the discipline of you and or your children if you weren't doing it correctly. So it was like really empowering to me that day, because those three things I've never had language for and have never been able to put them into action. But just the presence and just being able to do that, I know I'll have days that I'll slip back, but those three things, reclaiming even those things that I didn't have language for or wasn't able to articulate before, was really powerful. So thank you for being there for me.
Yes. Well, and I just want one of the things I love to do is reword things that people say to kind of concise points. And so when I hear reclaiming, what I hear is what you should have had, you now are creating yourself.
Right.
And
Yes.
right, everyone should have a sense of womanhood, right? That within the context of my gender, I have a community, and to be able to see it in a safe lens as opposed to a whatever the opposite of that is.
Yeah.
I won't pass judgment on that. The big one that I heard you say is asking for something from my people. And for a lot of that, a lot of us who had to sacrifice our authenticity for belonging, that comes from if I ask for something, I now owe someone something.
Ooh,
And what
yes.
Tamara was reclaiming is I know my community well enough that I can ask for something,
Yep.
and that's it. And that to me is community,
Yes. Yes.
as opposed to this contractual, performative, I do this, then you now, you
Exactly.
owe me that. And it's just, it's you're reclaiming. Those are really you're such a model for, and again, messy along the ways, and that's one of your transparency things is you can own, which it needs to be said more often as it comes to trauma recovery, and it is about using the tools. I guess. See, I question the thing of that you never recover from trauma. I think you do recover from trauma. Depends on how you define recover.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And so I actually was just talking to my husband earlier. He may hate me for saying this, but he grew up in an alcoholic home. And so avoidance, one of the primary functions of alcoholism is avoidance, right? Because it numbs, 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 numbs. And in his father's case, it also took him out of the house. And so it was avoidance of the drama in the home as well as numbing the feelings. And there's a big story there, well understood as to why. Um, but his response, my husband's response to that is to be controlling, right? I need to control every variable because that's how I'm going to keep myself safe. Because if things are unpredictable, right, if I can control my environment, it's going to create safety. Well, that doesn't work with me. So actually, I get triggered very much when I am controlled. I am very oppositional. I absolutely will cut my nose off to spite my face if I'm
Same.
if I feel like I'm going to be controlled. And so that when we first got together, that was something that we had to navigate. And so he was saying this morning about how not controlling he is, how more present he is within the relationship, right? That there's a listening that goes on, the serve and return that goes on, this presence goes on. Well, we just moved. And there's a lot of chaos that goes on with moving and renovating a home. And so the function of being controlling really pays off when it comes to renovating a home. Details really matter because you can have a really great product at the end. And so in that function is when can I turn on the adaptive strategy, right? When can
Yeah.
it work? When can it not? But for me, I got some of the I don't know what it starts with a C, whatever the word is, where the damage that occurs outside of right. So he's under this great deal of stress to get all of this stuff done. We have a time frame, collateral damage. That's the word I
Yeah.
want.
Gotcha.
And
Yeah.
I was the collateral damage. And in my head, so the way I navigated through this is I knew his bandwidth was depleted. Right. He
Yeah.
did not have the resources because it requires bandwidth to use your resources, to use the new tools. And so what I would do from a co-regulation point of view, which is another thing that Tamara was talking about, is we are injured in relationships, but we are absolutely healed in
Yes.
relationships. And so I could have taken it personally to be the collateral damage, right? My oppositionalness could have bowed up, right, which is a response to my trauma narrative. And so, but because I had the bandwidth and I am in relationship, I used my bandwidth as a tool to create co regulation in our relationship. to help him quiet down. And so I say that because to me, we could say, so his trauma narrative absolutely was popping up because of the things that were going on. So in that way, it's not healed. But because he has picked a partner who has allowed him to trust within the relationship and allows me to co-regulate with him, then his ability to regulate and then to use his tools, to me, is how we recover from trauma. So it depends on, I guess, half full, half empty, on how you choose to look at that. Um, our nervous systems will always be impacted, to Tamara's point, but I have the right tools in the toolbox now to be able to regulate that very quickly. And that to me is I have recovered from my trauma.
Yeah.
That's
So I
awesome.
don't know. I don't mean to discount you, Tamara, but that's
No, that's okay. Because I mean, I was just talking in the general form, and you did it so much more eloquently, right? Because I always was looking for, okay, eventually I know I won't be doing trauma therapy, right? But I thought I would always need trauma to continue doing something. So I was always, you know, and then I thought, well, if my trauma therapy ends, then I'm all better.
ah,
I'm fixed.
okay.
I'm good to go. I don't have to do
And to
anything
that
anymore.
makes sense. Correct.
And when she pointed that out to me, she was just letting me know. She's like, do you know if you're out of trauma therapy 2 years from now, you're going to have to use your tools because you're still going to be triggered. And I was like,
Yes.
and that's the biggest thing is I thought I would not be triggered anymore. I thought, smells wouldn't come to me, that I wouldn't smell while I'm dreaming and then have these smells that are not, they're like fake but they are real. Or, things wouldn't make me like my body respond certain ways. And I just thought, okay, these will all be done with and I'll be good. And then she was like, as long as you use your tools. So, Jeff, from your experience in trauma work, what do you think people most misunderstand about trauma?
The first thing that pops in my head is I'm defective. I'm broken. And that's one of the very first things that I do at the beginning of therapy is I really emphasize it's adaptive. The reason you respond the way that you do is because you needed that skill in order to be able to survive a situation. And so we often talk about, to give a simple example of, we talk about the nervous system impact by trauma, right? And there are two primary responses to trauma. So we have a hyperactive nervous system. So we move into hypervigilance, we move into fight flight. We do things in order to be able to protect ourselves from a physiological stance. And so that's where that hypervigilance is there. Or we have a hypovigilant state. We shut down, we become very small, called please and appease, or we dissociate to the point where some people even forget their trauma narrative. And so those are nervous system response to a traumatic situation. And to Tamara's point, the first thing that we have to do is be curious about, because many people don't even realize that their nervous systems are responding.
Yeah.
So we need to be able to figure out, well, who am I? Am I a hyper vigilant person or am I a hypo vigilant person? Because I need the right tools for the toolbox in order to respond to both. Now, people have both. It's not like you're one or the other, but we have a preferred method. So for me, I was a hypo responder. I was a please and appeaser. I'm a small statured guy. I'm all of 5'5". So physically, I am not ever going to intimidate people. And part of my trauma was to get me to comply was about intimidation. Well, when you're a kid, you're already small, but I was even smaller than my peers. And so I'm all small in stature and I'm small in frame as well. And so it would make sense that I could use my sense of humor and my how can I make someone like me in order to make me safe.
Right.
The problem with that, right, is that you lose yourself in that context.
Yep.
You have very little self-worth. Now, I was a performer, got great grades in school. A lot of people liked me, so student government. I was a natural leader. I mean, I looked really good. But the authenticity was not there. I didn't know really who I was. And when I entered therapy, that was one of the first things that I had to figure out because performative wise, I was a star. But
Yeah.
right, if you're not happy inside, that's not how that works. And so I had to figure that out right from the very beginning. That's kind of a typical hypo responsive behavior. The hypervigilant, which is usually the ones that seek out treatment, that's your panic attacks. That's your a lot of somatic issues. So we know about the polyvagal nerve, which is the nerve that goes through the center of our body, migraines, asthma, GI issues. All of those are falls along the vagus nerve, and depending on where we hold our hypervigilance, it's going to express itself somatically. And so we have to be very thoughtful about that. And so then the question is, well, can I give it up? Well, depending on the environment, I may not be able to give up hypervigilance because how does hypervigilance serve me? I can read your micro expressions. When you walk in that room, I'll know whether you're going to throw something at me
Yeah.
or you're going to belittle me. And so, because I can read those instantly because I'm hypervigilant, then if I need to go move into my please and appease state, I could go and do that. If I need to make myself small, I could do that. So even though there are hypovigilant responses there, your nervous system is still very active. So that's typically what you see with a somaticizer is they're typically a hypovigilant person, but they express it because they don't have words to be able to say it. They don't have that fight flight response. So my long way around here to your question is I do think being defective, I'm a monster, there's something wrong with me. And it's absolutely 100% the opposite of that. We are blessed with the resources that trauma gave us in order to be able to survive it. What we have to understand is I don't need it anymore. And that's your brain really, really struggles with that. It does not understand the concept of time and literally will distort data to validate that it's still going on.
Yes.
And I love that you are literally describing what it is that just about every single one of our guests has actually fought with and wrestled with through their healing journey, and that is self worth. A lot of people that come out of toxic religious spaces, they hate themselves. They have been taught from birth to view themselves as nothing but a piece of garbage. So to see, you as a therapist saying, hey, yeah, this is what people really struggle with, it's really powerful because that self worth is so huge into repairing harm that has been done. And it's like you said, like you can rewire those pathways. Even if they were wired incorrectly because of trauma, they can be rewired. We can retrain our brain. So I want to ask you, when conversations move into more vulnerable territory, what helps you know that somebody feels emotionally safe rather than managed or evaluated?
Well, I'm going to go right to Tamara's words, which is I do not give advice. I do not tell them what to do with it. It is literally being in presence with them. That is all that needs to be done because they've never, well, first of all, typically their own system doesn't allow them to be present with it. So if they've healed enough that they now can be present with them, to be vulnerable enough to do that with someone else is a huge risk.
Yeah.
And so, but when I say present, I don't necessarily mean the body needs to be there because then maybe I will be a little religious here, but the soul needs to be there. All of us needs to be sitting in the room with this messiness and say, and I still love you.
Yeah. And that's
And I
so
And
accept
beautiful.
you.
Yeah.
what's that?
And I accept you.
And most importantly, I accept you for everything that you have done,
Yeah.
all of everything that you have done. Now, I work mainly with men, and and maybe this isn't true, but men are brutal. They are absolutely brutal to themselves. And so when they start to get vulnerable enough to tell me some of the things that they had to do in order to cope, but the amount of shame that they have, and to be able to as we sit there with it, right? First of all, my nonverbals are saying, I accept you,
Yeah.
that you are not evil in order that what you did in order to be able to survive. That right there is a game changer because, right, they're looking for the micro expressions. They're looking for me to judge and say, oh, you should have been held accountable. You should have, you could have, you would have. Why didn't you? All of those statements, which is fortunately before we get to that level of vulnerability, they often know that I ask the question of what's the function of the behavior? How is this helpful to you?
Yeah.
And almost always the first response I get back is it isn't. And it always is. And so part of the reconstruction that I do is to help them to understand how a particular behavior, although it may be destructive in the here and now, was helpful to you in the past. And that's part of what we need to do is what I refer to as growing up the trauma narrative. That what we thought, what existed in the past is not true anymore.
It's so true.
So I do want to emphasize this as well, because I see this a fair amount in my practice, is that age of the trauma matters as well. So if a big trauma narrative occurred prior to the age of 5, we need to understand that trauma narrative is encoded solely somatically. Our ability to be able to construct a memory developmentally does not exist. So sometimes I just feel something and I don't know why.
Yeah.
And if we have good history, maybe we can make sense of that. So I was just working with someone this past week who had cancer when she was 3 years old. And as you know, when you have cancer,
That's a
the
huge
doctors are
trauma.
brutal to you.
Yeah.
They're doing whatever they can in order to survive. That's how a 3-year-old is going to encode that, right? They're not going to encode this. Oh, thank you for treating me and curing me of this horrible disease. And that's all encoded somatic. I'll even be more personal. My son, when he was born, he had the cord wrapped around his neck twice. And so they actually physically had to pull him out. And when they did, they broke his collarbone. So that's how he entered the world. He entered the world with a broken collarbone. And talk about a lack of attunement. And no offense to the nurse, but she was not attuned because when my wife went to go breastfeed, he would breastfeed on the right side, but he would not breastfeed on the left side. And so when we're parents, right, you add like, what's going on? Why is he breastfeeding on one and not the other? And her response is, he's lazy.
He's a
This is
baby.
why the question, what's the function of the behavior? Now, which I did not have then. He's 28 years old. I did not have that framework 28
Yeah.
years ago. The function of the behavior is it hurts because his collarbone was broken.
Yeah.
I didn't. And of course, my wife being brilliant, my ex-wife being brilliant, she did the football hold. She's like, well, if you'll breastfeed this way, then I'll just do the same thing over here. And
Yeah.
guess what? Because otherwise she had one huge boob and one very small boob. Like that was not
Yeah.
going to work. So she figured out in her solution oriented, she was able to, well, 9 days later, he ended up getting RSV, which is a very bad virus, and it went into his lungs, and he had to be intubated. So his oxygen level was so low that they had to intubate him, and you have to do an X-ray. And lo and behold, that bone was not even together; they were completely separated. Like, oh, well, now we have understanding as to why he would not breastfeed on that side. He had spinal meningitis as well, so he was a very very sick baby and was in ICU for about 2 weeks. And when he started to feel a little bit better, he actually took out the tube that was helping him breathe, but his lungs were not ready for it. And so, what was the doctor's response? They restrained him.
Oh no.
Now, logically, as a parent, when I saw it, I'm like, oh, I understand. I need that tube in order there for him to breathe so that his lungs can heal. But from encoding from a 2-week-old infant, what that said to him is, don't fight. It's dangerous to fight.
Oh wow.
One of his trauma. Now we had a pretty healthy family. There was not a lot of. We were not yellers.
Yeah.
We didn't. We were definitely in the transformative. Because I do this thing about transmit versus transforming. So transmitting is we repeat what has been done to us. We transmit. And when we have intent and when we have awareness, we can transform what happened to us to something different. And my ex and I definitely were in a transformative family orientation style. But I kept thinking, wow, he acts like a trauma survivor. Why does he act like a trauma survivor? And frankly, it was not until I got into infant mental health later in my career, which I specifically work with babies, 6 month, 1 year olds, in context of their caregiver, where basically my job was to be the interpreter for the baby. That's what I did as a therapist, the function of the behavior. I began to understand, oh, that medical trauma that my son experienced, when I understand the function of that behavior, and
Yeah.
when I got that insight, I was able to share it with my son. And when he gets these physical reactions, how do I interpret that? How do I grow it up? And that's what I worked with him on so that he could be more present in the here and now. Because somatically, when those things would happen, he went back to that 14th
Yeah.
day. So no memory, right? Because that's not how it's encoded. He would not take pills. So that's a great example. He would never take pills. Anytime that he ever got sick, it had to be a liquid form.
Hmm.
Interestingly, this is how cool my kid is when he began to understand how the trauma response was impacting him, he forced himself to learn how to take a pill
Wow.
because he wanted to recover.
Yes, he wanted to overcome it. That is so
Because he
incredible.
recognized locking up of his throat probably was the tube that was going down his throat. And so he was able to grow up the physiological response that he was experiencing, and now he can take a pill without a problem.
And
So,
just on a little side note, Jeff's baby and my baby, we're in the same hospitals at different year
yeah,
periods, but have been affected the same way, spinal meningitis,
Oh,
being
wow.
invaded. But it's so cool because he is from South Florida. I hope that's okay if I say that, Jeff. And so is I. So it's really cool, like with talking with him because he not only,
Yeah.
I know where he's been and he knows where I've been. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And Jeff, it's so funny because my next question is, you've worked extensively with children and adolescents. How did that shape how you understand survival responses later in adulthood? I think you just answered that, but
well, it one of the questions I get asked often is how do I hear the stories I hear? And I've been doing this work for 35 years. Yeah, at least 35 years. And because what I do, what I learned, to your point, Tamara, is I learned about resiliency. And what I did, so when you're working with kids, it's very different than working with adults because adults, right, the things that you can control are very different than what you can control as a kid. Now, my first go-to is, can I change the system? Right? So I would work with the family system because if I create a safety within the context of the family, then working with the child becomes a little bit easier. And that
Yeah.
always was not an option. So then it goes to, how do I work within the family system for the child from a resiliency perspective, but lay seeds to create an opportunity for when they are adults that they could do it differently. So if I'm working with a 5-year-old, right, it's going to be a different stance than a 12-year-old or a 17-year-old,
Yeah.
right? Because my opportunity to create change as I get older and can become more independent is very different. But resiliency is being able to figure out the nuance of, so we talked earlier about belonging and authenticity. Belonging trumps authenticity. But in that being said, was there a space in which I could create authenticity within the context of this belonging so that the child could feel seen in some way that I am okay, even with this kind of authentic behavior? And probably an easy thing to think about is ASD, autism spectrum disorder, right? Those are kind of quirky behaviors. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of judgment with your authenticity in order to be able to belong. So they mask, right? We hear that term
Yep.
all the time. And so what I would do with kids who were on the spectrum is I would figure out how can they express their authenticity within the context of their community. So they didn't have to mask, but that they could turn it on and off in the way they did. And that's exactly how I said it is you absolutely will need to mask in order to be able to survive, but you don't have to do it all the time. And
Yeah.
how can we create a space? Theater kids, right? That would be a good example of
Yes.
theater would be a space in which I could be authentic. I can turn it off there, But when I'm at high school and all the jocks and the people, bullies, and those kinds of things are around, you can turn it on.
Yeah.
And that's empowerment. That says self-worth. And so that I think is a big, big skill that I learned in working with kids. And I ran a children's mental health organization. So we treated thousands and thousands of kids. We were involved with the dependency system and the delinquency system and the school district. So I worked with many different systems to try to get systems to change. And within the context of those kids as well. Fortunately, I had a voice and I wanted to be able to use that voice in that way. But one of the other things kids taught me is patience. So I distinctly remember having a session with another therapist. We were doing a family session, and it was a very chaotic family. And I worked with one boy, and my co-therapist worked with another. And corporal punishment was one of the tools that mom used. That was one of the tools in her toolbox. And my way I navigate that is, let's expand your toolbox. So I would not say to a parent, stop doing this. They knew what the line was. If there was a mark left on the body, I had to report it. That's a black and white. I have there's no wiggle room here. But I'm not going to tell you don't spank your kid. But what I am going to say is, can we be curious about, is there another way to manage this? And I had a colleague who was not in agreement with my premise. And so we had to work together on and so this is where my patience really is. I had to chink away at the and I knew where she was coming from. She was coming from a place of protecting the kids.
Yeah.
I absolutely understood the function of her behavior, but I do know that the foster care system is not a place where kids should be. And this was a good mom. She had limited tools in her toolbox, but ultimately she was a good mom. And so I would just chink at my colleague, chink and chink. And she said several years later, she came back up to me and identified this very particular case and said, you have completely reframed the way I see corporal punishment today than I did back then. And that to me goes back to that patience. It's one of the things I learned with kids is you cannot tell a parent no. They will
Yeah.
never come back to your office ever again.
Yeah.
But we can say, well, let's be curious about, is there another way we can do this? And are you interested in doing that? That lands so much differently.
Because a lot of us, especially being raised in religious circles, corporal punishment was exactly you spare the rod, you spoil the child, right?
Yeah.
And it's always used. And I, and myself, I remember I used it on my children when
I
they
did
were
too.
little, and I didn't know there was anything else. I didn't know there was a different way. Nobody even
Yes.
told me that I could talk to my child or I could have a conversation with them. That like blew my mind. It's like, what? I can actually have a conversation with this little person. And then, once I left the high controlled religion, Jeff, I realized that I needed to make sure that they were being treated as little adults, like little humans. And when we know better, we do better. But if somebody would have came to me, in those first uh, years of my motherhood, I would have said, "Oh, absolutely not! You spare the rod, you spoil the child, and my child is going to
Yep.
be trained up in the way he should go. Thus, this way he won't depart from the Lord, my
Same.
God, when he gets old." Right? But then I realized, as once I left, I realized I could do things differently, and being curious about how to add that to what I was doing because it wasn't working. It wasn't working. I have very strong-willed and strong-headed children, and you're not going to beat Jesus in them, and you're not going to beat Jesus out of them, if I can use the phrase that was always said to me, right? But when I realized that when I talked to them and I would ask them why did you do this? What made you do this? What do you think about how other people viewed when you did this? How do you feel when you do this? And I didn't realize that my children were like smart enough to answer my questions, Chuck. It was like amazing.
Well, so from a chink in the armor, so first of all, I want to say the strong-willedness is what that tells me is they're hypervigilant, not hypovigilant, because basically beating them into submission, right, is please and appease.
Right.
Fortunately, and in this way, I see that as a resilience of you're not going to beat me in submission. I am going to be my own self. If you call that, right, we label that to shame kids because if we can't do it physically, we're going to do it from a shame lens to get them to
Mhm.
that place. So understand the function of those strategies which are, in my opinion, all harmful to humanness.
Hmm.
Um, the lens that I always operated, and so the corporal punishment is about you fear me, right?
Yes.
So basically all it teaches kids is to be covert. If I don't get caught, then I can
Yes.
do that. That's the message I'm sending to my kid. And the message I send to my kids, which is part of what you were saying, is we do the right thing because it's the right thing.
Yep.
And the golden rule, do unto others as we would have done to us. And to have conversation, because sometimes, right, our impulses is me centric, not us centric. And so I sometimes have to have a conversation to move it from me centric to us centric about what kind of impact did that have on your brother? Were you aware? Is that what you wanted? And again, it goes
Yeah.
back to those conversations. And ultimately it takes a while to learn those skills, but we can learn those skills. And then that's 24/7. That's 100% internal. I don't need to have an authority figure, a siren behind me, or a principal or a boss to know what the right thing is, because I'm going to do the right thing because it's the right thing.
Right. And sometimes it was because, and I also had to reteach myself because I realized when I reach for, spoil the child, spare the rod, spoil the child, I was angry. I wanted respect. I wanted them to listen to me, and I was coming from a lens to them of anger, and I had to stop and say, "Wait a minute. I must change my behavior first if I want my children's behaviors to change." And
Yes.
when they were little, I implemented in when something went wrong, we went into public and ate dinner because that kept me from being angry and explosive. So they knew that whenever we were going to McDonald's to get a Happy Meal, Mama was going to give a talk to them. But it
Yeah.
also knew that they didn't know till later that also made me speak to them and use words to them instead of just hauling off and smacking them because that would have been the easy thing to do, right? So it was kind of twofold. I wasn't only trying to help my children, but I also realized that I first needed to change my patterns and behaviors in interacting with my children.
But it really speaks to your resiliency because you were able to create a tool out of the toolbox that you didn't even know that you had.
I didn't.
You your people pleasing part of I need to make sure I look good in public as a tool to help yourself stay regulated when you have this conversation with the kids. Brilliant. I mean, it's just absolutely brilliant. And that's the kind of messaging, right? Not all trauma responses are bad. And so and one of the things that, because I work, my primary area of expertise is sexual trauma. And so, as you can imagine, when you're exposed to sex at a very young age, it can impact your sexual template. And so, one of the things that I talk to my clients is about kinks and how do we move from a compulsive behavior in which I'm driven without feeling some sense of control to evaluating, do I like this behavior or not? And if I do, how do I move it to a kink?
Yeah.
And right, there's such a sense of empowerment and authenticity as it relates to that. And it's a framework that they just don't understand because often kinks are supposed to be like, well, it's an F you to other people. It's like, well, but it doesn't have to be. It can be empowering. I do this because I like it. And I have a community of people that I can do this with. And that to me is authenticity and belonging married together, which is what my end goal is.
So, Jeff, we work in these spaces a lot, and we see a lot of people that often minimize their experiences because they don't think what they went through qualifies as trauma. So, how do you help people understand trauma more accurately and what it looks like in real life and the various ways it can show up?
Yes. Goes right, but I cannot tell. That's probably the number one thing that I hear at the onset of therapy. Yeah, something bad happened to me, but it's not nearly as bad as blah blah.
Yes. I did that for
Right?
I did
Therefore,
that
I'm
for
not
years.
worthy. I am
Years.
not worthy of this diagnosis. I run a men's group. I'm not worthy of going to this men's group because my trauma is not as bad as theirs.
Yep. They never
And
hit me.
or yeah, right. It could be concrete as far as the shininess of it.
Yeah.
Because I call that I loved it. One of my favorite expressions is the shiny object. It's actually the book that I wrote was called Beyond the Shiny Object. Right, the physical trauma or sexual trauma definitely are the shiny things out there, right?
Yeah.
Those are worthy of a trauma narrative. But we know emotional trauma or performative
Yes.
trauma is as bad on the nervous system as anything else. So I always go back to what's the function of the behavior? Why is it important for you to minimize that? I'm wondering what that's about. So to borrow Tamara's thing is, I'm curious what that stands first before I say to them, don't do that. Believe me, I want to say, don't do that.
Yeah.
I initially go to, well, let's be curious about that. How is this helping you out? And often where curiously it goes to is self-worth.
And Jeff, I
Yeah.
use that phrase all the time with my children and my grandchildren now. I'm like, okay, so let's be curious. Why are we doing this? Do you understand? But I also realize that it also promotes like that critical thinking um skills in my younger grandbabies, right? And I'm like, why what made you do this? Let's be curious about what this was all about. And they'll kind of like look at me but it's the truth is the earlier you teach them to be curious, the more questions they're going to ask and the better they're going to be able to be adaptive in the world around them.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we think about this from a neurological effect from trauma and a high controlled religion is curiosity stems solely in the prefrontal cortex. When we are traumatized, we move solely into our right, freeze, fawn response, which is in our amygdala in the base part of our brain. So we are solely on survival mechanism. And literally for super traumatized individuals, their prefrontal cortex is smaller than the average person
Wow.
because they don't have time and space to be curious and be creative because they're just looking, where am I going to get my next meal from? How am I going to stay warm? The basic needs.
Yeah.
And so it shuts that down. And part of my hypothesis of high controlled religion is people tell you what to believe in the Bible. This is what this means, and do this to minimize any kind of curiosity that's going on. Because if I start to have curiosity, then I'm going to
Yes.
ask questions, and we can't have that, right? We
Yes.
saw that if you know much about in history, right? The Catholic Church, which was the Christian religion up until the Reformation in the 1500s, it was all mass was done in Latin. The priest faced the cross, did not face the parishioners, and they were told what was in the Bible. They were not allowed to read the Bible.
Yeah.
It was not until Reformation that the Bible was translated into English, King James Version, and for people to begin to read it on their own to ask those curious questions. And that's kind of when you saw this huge change in the different sects
Yeah.
and parts of Christianity. Um, I say that because when you inhibit curiosity, you can control someone more.
Yes.
And that's why, and so as a therapist, because we can get off on trying to help people, right? There could be a power dynamic there. Um, we need to be thoughtful about power dynamics. And that's why I operate from the lens of curiousness, because I need to be equal with my clients. I am not, you know yourself much better than I do. I have a lot of knowledge. I have a lot of hypothesis that I can create in my head, but you will know whether it's right or not. And
Yeah.
that's why I have to be curious with you and not tell you what it is.
Exactly. You often say we are harmed in relationships and healed within relationships. What does that look like beyond theory?
Yes, great question. Because frankly, it takes a leap of faith. So I'll give a basic example. So let's say that you have some sense of abandonment as a child, whether you were adopted, whether you were in a high controlled religion and you had to give up your authenticity, which would be a form of abandonment. Um, so now my trauma narrative, my trauma trigger is having the expectation that if you really knew who I was, you were going to abandon me. And that is going, so just remember, so that's a trauma narrative. So we seek out data. So one of the things that our brains do is we seek out data as we get older to validate the original premise. So I could have 99 people who are reliable, predictable people, and one person who isn't. And I'd be like, see, People are not reliable, predictable. I will be abandoned. I am not worth anything. And I will continue to operate from that premise. So when we start to heal in the context of relationship, we have to challenge our expectations of what does it mean to be abandoned, right? This is where curiosity comes in because naturally we are egocentric. We are narcissistic by nature. So if bad things happen, we automatically assume it must have been something that we do. And I will tell you, because abandonment is also one of my trauma triggers, it is my default. If something goes awry, I immediately like, oh, did I not do something wrong? Did I forget something? Did I da 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 da? And so what I've learned to do is take a breath and say, ask, Jeff. Let's ask. I don't know what's true. I call it a shared reality. I need to have a shared reality to know what's true. And so I'll ask. Now, I have other data points that maybe I know that someone that I'm asking may not be truthful to me. They may, and I would keep that in the back of my mind. But often people are truthful. And the reason why they didn't show up in the way that I wanted them to show up was because something was going on in their life, not because of me.
Yeah.
So it's about
Yep.
slowing down enough to allow for us to be able to accept other people for who they are from that lens of curiosity in order for them to know that they are accepting me. And that creates the synergy of healing within the context of relationship. That's one. And probably the other one is that co-regulation, which is what I was talking about earlier. That when you tell your trauma narrative, I stay present with you and that I still love you for who you are. And that's the ultimate co-regulation because internally I don't accept myself for who I am. I am deeply ashamed of this.
Yeah.
And if I could be with someone like, well, they're okay with that,
Yeah.
then I can begin to challenge my own belief, like, well, maybe I can be okay with that too. Maybe it really was adaptive. It's not because I'm a monster, but it was because I was trying to survive in that environment.
And I realized, Jeff, with my trauma, right, that I knew somebody wasn't going to love me forever anyways. So I was going to make sure that I gave you a reason not to love me. Because if I gave you that reason not to love me, then it was easier for me to disappear and walk away. So I was self-destructive, always have been. And so staying present was very challenging for me over these last couple of years, being able to stay and not just say, listen, I have enough reasons if you're going to hate me anyway someday. So let me give you the reason to hate me because then I'm okay with walking away.
Right.
And I realized that I was never going to heal because I kept repeating those patterns. And I would laugh about it. I would think it's funny. I was like, it's okay if they don't love me. I'll give them the reason not to eventually. And then I'll be okay. Because the minute I give you the reason not to love me, then I feel like that's what I expected anyways. And I
Yeah.
didn't deserve anything more. So then I was okay with it.
But you can hear how adaptive that is. I
Yeah.
was trained to believe that everyone was going to leave me. So let me create, at least I can be in control of that.
Yep.
And so therefore I'm not quite as much of a piece of shit because now I've given you a reason to leave me as opposed to I don't know why you left me. And that's incredibly adaptive. But to your point, to sit with that and regulate your nervous system to do it differently is very difficult to do, which is why we have to be cautious about who our tribe is. How do we pick the people as far as we're choosing to heal with? And so obviously I'm an advocate of therapy. Therapists in general should have that skill set to be able to do that. And I know that's not true. One of the things I struggled with at my nonprofit is if they got a difficult case, they would say, I'm not qualified to do this. We were a training organization, right? We were a nonprofit. Texan Teens, I'll shout out to Texan Teens. That was the organization I created. We would see people for $3, right? That's pretty damn affordable
Yeah.
for there.
Yeah.
But in order to be able to do that, we would hire new people who had just graduated from school. I loved it because then I could train them the way I wanted them to do. And I would get this narrative of I'm not qualified. And I'm like, this is my thing. And I'm pretty sure it's backed up in research, but that 80% of healing occurs in the relationship, not the techniques you use. It's not EMDR, it's not CBT, it's not ACT, it's not DBT, all the lovely letters that we have. It's just the relationship. If I accept you for who you are and be present with them, that is good enough. Now, as your supervisor, I'm going to train you on these different interventions so that we can get that other 20%. But this is where their anxiety would get in the way because their anxiety would prevent them from being present with their clients. And I would push right back on them. And I'm like, if you have anyone to blame, it's going to be me because I'm not right. This is what we call the parallel process. My job is to regulate you so you can regulate the client. And so if you're not feeling regulated or if I'm not present enough, that's on me, not on you. So part of that co-regulation or healing is who is taking responsibility when things go astray and how can we do it differently the next time around it.
So actually, this is kind of beautiful and it plays right into my next question because you keep talking about presence. So, how is presence different from fixing, rescuing, or giving advice?
Well, all of those other things are an authoritative, I know you do not. Presence is about equity.
Ooh, I love that.
It's good.
We
And it
are
goes
on
right.
equal ground. I love
And
that. That's
that
beautiful.
goes to self-worth. I believe you're worthy. You may not think that. And you may think that I need to have all of the answers. But no, I think you actually have the answers, and I'm going to be curious with you to get there.
That's beautiful.
And that is a narrative that is dismantling of that monster image.
Yes, yes,
And then what I've noticed with my personal therapist and with Jeff, he just holds the space for
yes.
you to work it out yourself. And my therapist just holds that space of making sure that when I start, pulling my hair or tapping or doing all of these body signs, right? She'll just sit there quietly and say, "You're still worthy."
Oh, that's so precious.
Yeah, so important too. Because for somebody who's actually healing from trauma, if anybody in the audience is listening today for healing for trauma, make sure that you remember what he just said. You are worthy.
Yes,
And just let that sit with you.
always worthy.
Yeah, one of the things that I also is that you may not feel like you are worthy, but I know you are worthy.
Yes, yes,
So to almost counter to what I was just saying, which is I'm not going to tell them something, but if it's a faulty belief, I will challenge it. And it's like you can have your belief of not being worthy, but you need to understand I have a belief as well, right? I have
yes.
my autonomy and agency, and I do believe you're worthy.
And I'll believe you're worthy for you for right now.
Right. And the other
Exactly.
important part is too is that we can only see the perspective of what we have with the limitations of our brain and what we've been able to um, gather or
Yeah,
learn over our lifetime, right? So in order for somebody to say that I'm worthy, if I don't know what worthy means, then I need to be showed what worthy means to change my perspective on what worthy means. This way I can grow into knowing that I can be confident and self assured and worthy because all my life I have one image in my head of what being worthy is. And that is not the perspective that somebody else has. But if I've never viewed that other perspective or learned or been taught that other way, somebody has to be able to stand in that space and let me understand what worthy means. And that sometimes takes a minute of calming yourself down and being able to step outside and learn what being worthy means.
yeah.
Yes.
So, why is curiosity such a powerful counter to shame?
Well, shame is judgment, right? I have a narrative and I'm making a judgment related to that. Curious is it's just that. It's just I'm interested. And it's paced, right? There you have to slow down and feel safe enough to be curious. Whereas shame is I can default to that right away. Um, so it's a nervous system response, counter response, but it's also a cognitive. One of the things I talk about with my clients is the human psyche is all about equity between what I am thinking and what I am feeling.
Yes.
But we default, just understand we default to the somatic. The somatic drives the train. And then our thoughts are going to catch up with that. And some of the things I have to do is I need to inform. So I have to use my brain to inform my body. That was true 10 years ago. That is not true anymore, right? I'm always about grace first. Like, I understand, body, why you're doing this, but I don't need it anymore. And I don't need it anymore because I have my own job. I'm able to pay my own bills. I don't want to be independent, but I can be independent. I think of the resources that I have that may be activating my nervous system that's preventing me from feeling safe. But it is about the equity. It is somatic and it's cognitive. It's both.
And it was so important to me, Jeff, going through this journey this last year, that I realized that whenever I would just let those thoughts go in my brain, they were just circles. They would just keep repeating themselves and repeating themselves and repeating themselves. But when I started saying that out loud, when I started saying out loud, I am okay, I am safe, I have the tools that I need, that's when it stopped. And that's when I started being able actually to do the work, because I took the time to say I could be stuck in my brain forever. I could overthink forever. But the minute I would say those words out loud, it stopped the overthinking.
One of the concepts I use a lot, especially in dream interpretation, which is ambivalence, because dreams often present ambivalence of what will happen if I give this up, and all the anxiety, the somaticness that goes on. We call it extinction burst. Like, before I truly believe you, I'm going to make sure, is it really safe? Or to the full blown panic attack. I can't catch my breath. Because you were asking me to give up something that has kept me alive. And
Yeah.
and it's interesting that you say that when you actually said it out loud, right? There's actually an auditory response to that you were able to close the loop. There's a whole theory based on name it to tame it. That there are two different parts of the brain called the receptive and expressive language centers of your brain. So one expresses it, one receives it, right? When we overthink, it's just the expressive. There is nothing being received because it's not going in anywhere else. That when you actually say it out loud, one of the tools I give my clients is writing it down as opposed to saying it out loud. So if you're overthinking, just write everything down. It closes the loop because it hits the expressive center. So
Ooh.
it's not part of
Yeah.
the receptive center. It's not no longer being expressed, but it's also being received. And you can close the loop. So for those of us, like for me in work, when I was running the nonprofit, I would have all these tasks and I would just ruminate, ruminate, ruminate. And eventually I learned, like, just get up and write it down. And lo and behold, I was able to fall asleep because I later learned when I started doing the infant mental health, the developmental work about the expressive, because it's a learning processing disorder. Some people have expressive language, that would be your ASD, and some people have receptive language disorders, which would be more of your ADD.
So, what shifts in the nervous system when somebody is met with curiosity instead of judgment?
The core goal of that is about relaxing the nervous system. It is supposed to help you what I call down regulate the nervous system. So here's an interesting thing as far as being able to recognize what is your go-to response. So if you're a hypovigilant, you're someone who dissociates or are always in people pleasing, curiosity actually is not going to work for you, because curiosity is a down regulation tool. For someone who is hypo, I need to up-regulate them. So I'm going to need to do strategies that are much more active, like psychodrama, express some type of expressive therapy to get them to activate their nervous system first, and then be able to get to do the work that way. So you can't be present with someone who is not present, right? If
Yeah.
they're already dissociative, they can't see you, so that's not their nervous systems are already, they look already regulated,
Yeah.
but they're actually not. And so I have to upregulate them first before I begin to do the tool. And that's why it's important to understand, who am I, what is my go-to, so that the right tool is being used to the right client or the right person.
And Jeff, you know that you do the dream stuff, right? And so this question kind of goes back to what you just said a minute ago. Why do dreams matter, especially when trauma happened before language?
Such a great question. So there are three primary functions of trauma from a PTSD perspective. Anxiety, right? It activates the nervous system, as we've been talking about throughout this podcast. Repetition. So one of the elements is that we have a tendency to not we don't have a tendency. We repeat the trauma narrative over and over again. Sometimes it's a literal repetition, and sometimes it's symbolic. And that's, I will tell you, for men that I work with, that's usually my biggest hook on how I can get them to be curious that what happened really did happen. Because there's a lot of people like, I have this memory, but I don't think it's true. I don't think it really happened to me. And so, for instance, I had someone whose trauma narrative had to do with urinating. And so when I asked him about from the time this happened, did you ever have any issues with you? Now, he would not have said that his trauma narrative was about urinating, but that's how I encoded the information. So I asked him the question, like, well, did you ever have any problems with urinating? He's like, oh yeah, I always had to find where the restroom was. No matter whenever I was in public, I needed to know where it was because his thing was is he needed to have a voided bladder. Right. So from a trauma narrative, right? If I don't have urine in my bladder, I can't traumatize someone with my urine, which is what his trauma narrative was about. And that was an aha moment of that has nothing to do with trauma, right? That hyper scanning of either I always leave the house with an empty bladder, and that no matter where I go, I always find the bathroom is the first thing I do when I walk into a public place. And he was hyper vigilant about it. And so from a curious lens, well, what's the function of that? How was that helpful to you? And that's when he was able to directly link it to his trauma. And I'm like, well, that doesn't happen unless the trauma actually occurred. Dreams can be very similar to that. Is there could be so I there are several different types of dreams, but there are PTSD dreams as well, which is part of the repetition element of that. And that's why I love dreams, because the third aspect of a trauma response is avoidance. So whether it's a blatant avoidance, like I completely block out the memory, or I minimize, like, well, yeah, that happened to me, but I'm over it. It doesn't matter. Why am I wallowing in the dirt? I hear all kinds of narrative as to why I want to. I'm moving forward. The past doesn't affect me. I mean, I got all kinds of mantras as to why that is not true. It shows up in dreams, anyways.
Yeah.
And so if I can help them be curious about what are the metaphors that are going on in their dreams and what does that mean, it opens doors in a very safe way, because it's not a direct knock, knock, knock. It's more of, oh, isn't this interesting? Especially if you have repetitive dreams. It's not mine, but it's Jung's theory. So the reason why we have repetitive dreams is basically your unconscious is saying you are ready to do this work. You have the resources available to do this work, but you're not doing it. How
Oh,
come?
wow.
And that's part of what I do in dream interpretation is, well, let's be curious as to what it is that you're avoiding. Out, then the repetitive dream goes away.
How do you help people sit with dreams without rushing to interpretation?
So I asked them so I'm actually in the midst of writing a book on this right now.
Ooh, how exciting.
It's,
I love to
I'm actually
read.
kind of excited as well. It's kind of taken several different shapes as I've written it, but
Jeff,
oh,
can we give an example?
sure. Do you want to do a dream?
Absolutely. I
Okay.
dreamed last night that my fingernail
Hmm.
broke, but it wouldn't come off. So I was in excruciating pain because, it's a fake nail, but it was stuck. And all through my dream, I kept trying to push it down, push it down, and push it down. And I was crying because if you get your fingernail caught and bend back really bad, it hurts. And I woke up all upset and flustered and crying because my nail was broken. And I really thought it happened, but
Hmm.
my nails weren't broken. But I could feel the pain.
Yeah, so when you say push it down, for someone who doesn't wear nails, I don't know how is that, what does that do for you? Because it seems like you were trying to cure something or fix something.
Yeah. So it was lifted. So I have fake nails. So the
Okay.
fake nail was bent back off of the real nail, but it was tearing the nail bed of my real nail. So I was trying to like glue it down to make it not hurt.
Okay. Do you have an idea what this means?
I kind of I no, not really. I
I
mean,
don't have a
I
clue.
think I remember,
Like,
but I was like,
Let's do
oh,
this
that's why I was like, oh, I have a
the
simple dream.
yeah, so let's do this as the traditional route. So the first thing we do in dream interpretation is we got to figure out what the metaphors are. So in this particular case, right, the metaphor is the fingernails or fake fingernails. So what do fake fingernails mean to you?
Um, it means that I always look at something pretty. It means that it means self-care. And it means that the ugly nails that are underneath never show.
Okay, so you can see here how I'm trying to figure out the function of the metaphor in the dream. So in this dream, right, so she's got the tool is it's something that, and so part of this is instinctive as well. So I kind of, what I call, I listen to her, and if there's something she's saying that feels like it tingles my spidey senses, then I'm like, oh, this probably is where this is going. So there are two things that she had said there. One is that they're pretty. That was the first thing that she said, right? And then she said it was about self-care, and then she said, what was the third one?
That my nail base underneath is really weak and they're ugly and they're
Oh,
like nasty and
underneath, it's covering up something that is ugly, right? Which kind of goes with the first one, which is it's pretty. And so it's coming off, right? The pretty nail is coming off, and there was a lot of anxiety, even pain, that I got to make sure I cover up that ugliness.
I love it.
So from a resource, so again, the theory is the reason we get these dreams is your unconscious is saying, I have the resources to deal with this. So if I were to guess, the meaning of this dream is she is ready to show some of her ugliness, but she is terrified to do it.
Mm.
She keeps going, and it goes back to the ambivalence of these make me feel pretty. This is a lot of self-care. But if you really knew it, you would see something ugly under all of this. But what's
those have
important
been
is,
exactly my words in my head.
but the important part is your unconscious is saying, actually, you have the resources to expose this to the people you want to, right? That's the difference between the past and the present. In the past, my guess would be, because this is how many high control religions is, they publicly shame people for doing something that they're not supposed to
Yeah.
do. You have no agency on who you can share your vulnerability with. This is I get to choose.
Yeah.
I have the nail and I can wear it whenever I choose to, but I will also have the ability to lift it off to let people see the ugliness, and they will accept me for who I am, even with that.
I love that.
That's the end. That's basically where she's in her trauma recovery is she's ready. Her unconscious believes she has the tools to really do the public version of the ugliness. She's probably done it with some private people. And when I say public, it's not everyone, it's people who are not in the inner circle.
Yeah.
Like this podcast.
So you could
Yeah.
see why you could see as a trauma therapist how useful dreams are, right? Because if my client brings this to me, I get to honor the ambivalence, which is what this was an ambivalence dream of do I or do I not? And then what tools do I have in order to be able to expose? And if I'm going to expose, who am I going to expose to? It allows a whole opportunity to have this conversation as far as trauma recovery, because we heal in the context of relationships.
Yes.
When I woke up this morning, right? I was waking up with my nail hurting. Like I thought it was like really, and the first thing I did was like, oh my God, wait a minute, that
Which
was
is
a
the nervous
dream.
system response of
Yes.
shit. Can I do this?
So I want to ask you one question as we're starting to wind down here, Jeff. What would you to say to somebody who might feel like it's too late for them to start their healing journey? What would you say to them?
It is not. So, first of all, I never think anyone is broken, and it is never too late. And I really don't even know what that means. I guess when I hear that, I hear like, now you're ready.
Yeah.
Whenever you're ready, you're ready.
Yes.
He was the first one to tell me that I was not broken.
Yeah. And when we come out of these high control religious spaces, hearing that from somebody is so powerful because we were told our whole lives we were nothing but broken vessels, right? Like
Yes.
God can still use a broken vessel the same as he can, anything else. So when we hear that from somebody and
Well,
they authentically, genuinely mean that you're not broken, it's just such a profound truth to sit with. Because what do you
yes.
mean? Like at first I was like, what do you mean I'm not broken? You are lying. That's what I wanted to say at first. You liar.
Well, that's why. So, that goes, well, first I wanted to say one of the more common narratives I hear is if you did this right, you would not have this problem. That's why you're broken. You're broken because you're not doing it right. You clearly don't love God as much as you say you did,
Yeah.
because if you did, you would be doing it right.
Yep.
And that's why we internalize the brokenness.
Yep.
Yes.
And again, we're giving up our authenticity in order to belong.
Yep.
And now I've forgotten my second thought, but I'm sure it was great.
You have been absolutely brilliant, and we have loved having you so stinking much. And to everybody that's listening today, I am going to leave Jeff's links in our show notes. That way, if you want to find his book, read up and see some of the things that he's doing, you can connect with him if you want to. And please hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed our show today. We enjoy having these conversations with you, and we could not do this without your support. So thank you for being here with us today. Thank you, Jeff, for spending all this time with us. We are so grateful to have you.
If any listeners takes one thing from this conversation today, please,
You
what
are
would you
enough.
have them take?
You are enough.
You are enough. It's a beautiful note to end on. You are enough.
And were you going to say something else, Jeff? I didn't mean to cut you off.
I've forgotten.
Okay.
This is like my favorite topic. I love human beings. And I just want, that's why am so passionate about this, because we create our own disconnection, and I want so much to create connection.
Yes, it
And
is
always when I'm with
beautiful.
you, I just feel like your words just give me a warm hug. So you mean the world to me.
Thank you. How
Thank you.
serendipitous all those years ago that we met, right?
Yeah. And look at us now.
It goes back to it. The world is an amazing place. It just is an amazing place.
Especially because you're in it.
We're all in it, yes.
And let me make sure that I tell this fantastic therapist, I accept you, I love you, and I'm so glad you've been part of my journey.
Religion has many victims, and these are the stories of how they survived.
The preceding podcast is solely owned by the host or hosts and is distributed by Big Media LLC. Copyright 2026.